Okay, today we're going to talk about the four opponent powers. And these are these practices these four aspects of a practice that we do called purification. And so purification is something that is a big part of my practice, actually. It's what I relate to almost the most strongly in terms of my daily practices. And I think that's because I have come to appreciate that maybe not the depth, but something about the craziness of my mind, all the obscurations in my mind, and this method seems to help. And so I appreciate having this practice that Venerable Chodron taught us years ago. Is probably one of the first things I learned about. So maybe sometimes the first things you learn about are most salient to you. But also we do this practice every morning and evening here. So it's something I've done for many years. And I think it's really true that, we know we have a lot of defilements in our mind but we also know they aren't a part of the mind. And we're not completely convinced about that yet. But this practice, I think, helps us to see that, because we see as the months, more so years, and as many years go by, we see the changes in ourselves and we see the changes in others. And that gives us some confidence that these kind of practices can make a difference. And for some people, they might not want to do these four opponent powers exactly the way that we're doing them here. We do them in a Buddhist context. But I actually believe that these are appropriate for a person of any faith, or even a person who doesn't have any religious tradition. They work on a psychological level in one aspect, and our minds can be cultivated like a garden, like you get the soil ready before you plant seeds, and you need all these conditions to come together for plants to grow and all that. And our minds are no different. I think that's why Shantideva said, treat your mind like a wound. You know, when you have a wound, you just don't go anywhere and just thrash around, and you kind of have to be protective a little bit so it stays clean and it doesn't get dirt in it and things like that. We have to, in a way, treat our minds that way in a little bit, not in the sense like we're wounded, but in the sense of something that we take care of. And this is one way that we can help ourselves. So these four opponent powers are these four aspects of doing purification. And purification can really change us. And how will we know we're changed? Milarepa said it's because actually we will be different. Our behaviors will be different. And we'll notice things. And so maybe we don't have some of the things they describe in the texts, but I think most of us have enough experience with this to see the impact on our lives from doing these practices repeatedly. For myself, I would say a lot of it is a lot more self-knowledge, a lot more discernment about what is a healthy sense of regret versus having guilt. That's very much unburdens the mind to what is the difference between purification and punishment. You know, there's so many things that I've learned about myself that I wouldn't have figured out any other way, I don't think. So in this practice, we do these four things. And the first one, I'm going to describe them as they're described in our Vajrasattva practice, exact same titles in the same order. Sometimes people flip the orders around a little bit, and we also do this with our 35 Buddha practice. But in that practice, it's not spelled out so clearly. If you're not a Buddhist, you could do this practice just in another way and use other means for some of the parts that are described, and I think that will be more obvious in a moment. So the power of reliance. This is where we take refuge and we generate bodhicitta. So we make mistakes, and we need to purify these mistaken actions that we've done of body, speech, and mind. And we don't do those in a vacuum. They're in relationship to other beings. So maybe we've done something that we realize now wasn't something that we wish we had done, and it affected another sentient beings. We need to restore that relationship. Or maybe we've done something, I'm sure I have, I know I have, I can think of a handful of things in relationship with our spiritual mentors, we need to restore that relationship. We need to, when things are out of whack in that way, when they're out of balance, we need to have something wholesome that we come back to. And what is more wholesome than wishing for every sentient being to be free of every suffering and wanting to become a Buddha to do that, this aspiration of bodhicitta? That really is a wonderful basis for a relationship with any sentient being. And with our spiritual, with the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and our spiritual mentors that we've chosen, they don't put themselves on us, people that we choose from learning about what is proper. We make mistakes with relationship to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and our spiritual mentors, and we need to restore that relationship. And what is the proper relationship to have with that class of objects? These are what we're relying on to take care of our situation in samsara, even our daily life sometimes, and also to reach our highest aspirations. So we take refuge in these objects, in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and our spiritual mentors. And so we restore the relationship by reestablishing this refuge, this safe direction in our lives. And so, of course, there's a lot to learn about all these aspects, but that's the first power of reliance. So that's kind of reestablishing things. The next one is the power of regret. And this is the most important of the four, because without this, the practice really can't be effective. So regret is we bring to mind a specific action of body, speech, or mind, and we review it. How do we get involved in this? Think about the specific details. And then for me personally, I try to focus on seeing how this is mistaken, how it's harmed someone else, how it's harming myself, how it's going to bring future suffering to myself. Maybe not to the other person, it could. It's definitely unwholesome action. It's definitely going to bring some future harm to myself, some future suffering to myself, which I perceive as harmful at this point. And so we generate regret, realizing this was a mistake. Something I did was mistaken. What happens for many of us in our culture is that we can't discern regret from guilt, and then we get into what is actually a lot about me, and I feel so bad, and I'm so horrible, and this and that. We feel very guilty and want to beat ourselves up about things. That's really not helpful here. It's actually counterproductive. It's actually, in the bottom line, there's a lot of self-centeredness in that, in the sense of who's the focus here? Are we really thinking about the other person then? No, I'm all tripping out on myself, like how I'm doing, how blah, blah, blah. It's all about me. So that's where for myself, what works for me with this is, and Venerable help me with this, is I generate, for me, thinking about the harm that's happening, both to the other person and myself, is quite helpful. Seeing that I don't want to suffer in the future, I don't think about as much, but I should. But I find that if I can just say to myself, wow, this was a mistake, and I wish I hadn't done it, like they always say, as if you had drank poison, but you didn't realize it. And once you realize it, you wish you hadn't done that, right? But you don't have to then now take out the bottle and hit yourself over the head with the bottle. So once I just make myself stop at that point, I don't keep going on, so I'm going to have my mind pull me into some kind of guilt. I just stop there and I move to the next point if I feel like this energy to kind of like berate myself for mistakes. And our mistakes can be pretty harmful. They can cause a lot of problems. You know, we can do some pretty crazy things. But if we see ourselves if we can't separate out the person from the behavior, and we think we're bad people, we think we deserve to some kind of retribution for this, that's not actually going to help our mind at that point. What we want is a feeling of regret. Wow, this was a mistake. We're trying to make our mind into something that sees this as mistaken, so we're almost like setting up a barrier that will keep us from doing this again. That's what I find so effective about this, is like, wow, by having this regret and having it be sincere and seeing all this, I'm actually building a wall between me and this behavior again, which I can't always, I transgress it, because I have habitual tendencies, but I keep pulling myself back and purifying these things, and that over time is very helpful. It can help to change us. So that's the power of regret. And then we have the power of the remedial action, and this is where in our setting here we do this 35 Buddha practice. So we do this action, this practice of Buddhist practice involving the body, speech, and mind. That's the remedial action. We also do the Vajrasattva practice, another practice that involves more the, I would say, the speech and the mind. We don't do prostrations with it, although there's a way where you can. But still, we're choosing an action that we want to do as a part of this practice to help to remedy the whole situation of a unwholesome action. You could do many other things. You could, in the Buddhist practice, there's a wide range of things to do, but for non-Buddhists, you might have your own spiritual practice that you do this, incorporate these four opponent powers in, or you might do something to help the person who you harmed, if that's feasible, or to help someone who's like that person. Maybe you harmed somebody and they've passed away, but you could help somebody else who is in a similar situation, or you could do community work, or you could study something that would be wholesome for you. You know, the sky's the limit on what you could choose for the remedial action, but it would be a very intentional thing. It wouldn't be just like, yo, I'm just going to go walk down this hallway and that's it. No, we're going to pick something that is a part of this whole practice with the intention that this is the remedial action. So, and then the next one is the power of determination. Also important because through this power, we are, well, there's different ways to do this. The way we do it in this practice is we make a determination not to do this practice, not to do this action again. And we say, I'll do my best not to do these destructive actions again in the future. We also often will set a duration of time. So for some things I've done in my life, I can say, I will never do this again in this life. For other things, especially mental things, I have to sometimes say, for a few nanoseconds, I won't let my mind go there. I try to pick something longer than that, but some things we can say. Often I say to myself, I actually come up with something I'm going to work on for, a period of time. So, we make a determination not to do this action again in the future. It's good to try to set some kind of duration. It seems to make it more, you're making more of a commitment to yourself to think about this more than just that moment. It kind of brings it forward, I find, to set some duration of time. So, for someone who isn't used to this, we have many teachings about this practice. This is probably a little short to be able to learn how to do this practice. It's just like a little introduction. But we have many resources on this, and most of those resources are on our website, tuptenchodron.org. And we have many books and things like that, but just for people who might watch on this video, I'll just mention that. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add? We have a lot of people in this room who've done purification for years. We could probably count up hundreds of years just in this room of practice, especially if maybe for a non-Buddhist. Any ideas?
I think for non-Buddhists that I've talked to people about.
Yeah.
In the power of reliance.
Mm-hmm.
It's really thinking about what are the values that you must do.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the where we started was the power of reliance, and for someone who wasn't Buddhist, think about your values there, and that could be what you're like taking refuge in, and maybe this sense of integrity of values you want to live up to, and that's be how you might reestablish your relationship with just ordinary beings. And Ninette did more to add to that.
So really getting clear about, I value kindness. I want that to be a way of my own life, and so I want to defend a relationship with beings that I've not been kind to, for example.
Okay, the focus there might be, for example, that one value I might have is one of my core values is kindness. And so maybe I wasn't able to live up to that in a certain situation. I'm purifying that. Well, to take refuge then in a sense would be, and And the value that you would bring up was just that, like, hey, this is something that is important to me. This is our sense of integrity in life. I hold this to be important. And we can't actually live up to our values. And that's okay. Gandhi was very clear about this. The fact that we have these values and that we strive for that is really what's most important here. The fact that we fall down from that and our minds are not always able to hold our own sense of integrity, that's not unusual. But if you don't recognize it, you can't purify it and you can't improve. If you can recognize these things, then you can really grow. For me personally, I struggled in some years in living here at first. And then I came upon the mental factors of integrity and consideration for others. And as you study more in our Lam Rim texts and other texts, these are pretty core to being able to have a spiritual practice that is going to serve you well, I would say. And so to learn about what it feels like to know what your own values are, how you want to live in the world, regardless of how other people think things should be done. There's a lot of confusion in the world, obviously. But if you hold to certain things and they're wholesome things, and then you find yourself not living up to them at times, this is a way to repair that even within your own mind. It keeps you from I find that it helps your ethical conduct, which makes your life much more peaceful. It makes your relationships better with most everyone. Some people might not understand what you're doing, but all in all, your destructive emotions and those things can diminish because of this, and your interactions with others can be more peaceful, even if they don't, understand your lifestyle or your values. Still, you can have more harmonious relationships.